Well, welcome to this class on political theory. We take up today a concept which is very ancient and very modern at the same time. I mean the concept of justice. The word justice basically means inherent rightness. It is itself a value concept. It has basis on social and political obligations of man. The root ideas of justice is in Latin language jus or justus or justitia. All more or less mean the idea of a bond or tie, that is, joining or linking man with man, between value and value, in organized system of human relations. That is to say, justice basically should stand for a general synthesis of values like liberty, equality, fraternity, and cooperation. There is a constant process of adjustment and readjustment between all these four major values of political philosophy. I think it will be interesting in this connection to take note of what Ernest Barker said in his Principles of Social and Political Theory. I quote Barker, "Justice is the reconciler and synthesis of political values. It is their union in an adjusted and integrated whole." This is the type of theoretical formulation that modern age we find from Barker. Now, let us trace the sources of this idea of justice as the controlling idea of right and wrong. What is right and what is wrong? It is the justice which determines, or at least seeks to give some sort of a definition. And from that point of view, justice has four sources. First, religion. Here I mean that the very idea of what is good and what is right and how that to be reconciled emerged from the beliefs of Catholicism, that it is justice as an idea which emanated from God with capital G. So this is one kind of most ancient roots of the idea of justice, one can say. The second source is nature with capital N. It was the Stoic philosophers who in fact identified nature with God and with reason. Capital G, capital R. Abstract reason or God, the same thing as what nature teaches. So Stoics believe in this, that humans are linked in solidarity among themselves. That is how the human relations are not to be disturbed. It is the justice, reference to justice, that one has to understand it. And the secular view of justice we get in the 17th and 18th century. In the 17th century, the most important figure in this connection is John Locke. Then the French and German thinkers in the 18th century. Now, Locke made any elaborate discussion of justice as such, but he explained that the relations between those who have property and those who do not have property, they must be reconciliated, adjusted, and justice has to be done. So in course of his vision of bourgeois capitalist society, what kind of human relations should be the just, he made a difference like this.
Sir, how did Locke manage to reconcile these two opposing streams? Did he propound any sort of ideas about it?
Opponents which
means
streams?
the propertied and those who did not have any property?
No. It is quite natural, na? In human society, always somebody will have property, somebody don't have property.
Yes.
Locke defended right to property to the extreme. So naturally, what ought to be the relation between propertied and non-propertied? So that came in through the discussion.
Okay,
Natural law is one thing that the Stoics said. But when we come to the 16th and 17th century, or 17th more specifically, 17th and 18th century, we find the concept of positive law, that is man-made law, is emerging, and naturally it is expected, according to the ethics of that time, that man-made law must be in consistence with natural law in order to be just. So you get the link between Stoics and Locke. And in fact, Locke very many times referred back to those teachings. So this is, I think, some sort of a watershed divide on discussion of justice, that now philosophers say that man make the law, but lawmaking is not arbitrary. It has to take note of some sort of an acceptable standard of justice prevalent in the society. That is the starting point of modern idea of justice. I hope you get the point.
Yes, sir.
Now, the third source can be called economics, the science of economics, but not the science as such, but the idea of economics. Because here we find in the 18th century a number of economists and philosophers. I mean the anarchists, and of them at least two very important, Proudhon and Bakunin. Now Proudhon, he defined property as theft. He said that all properties are theft. Property cannot emerge without the property owner stealing something from others. So all property, small, private, big, whatever which you say, Proudhon was very assertive that all property is theft. That is the very famous quotation from him. And naturally his solution as an anarchist was abolish private property and all kinds of property. There must not be any poverty in an anarchist society. Anarchist does not mean chaotic. Anarchist means where there is no inequality. Absolutely no inequality is there. That is the anarchist in that sense, philosophical sense. So it must be bereft of property concept as such.
Sir, somewhat it resonates of the theory of surplus value?
No, not at all. Not at all. He said that how can property originate? So in course of that, he came to define it like this. Then some Russian thinkers and revolutionaries, they also thought in that line. Some of them were on the verge of anarchism, but not anarchist as such. Then we come to the legalist view, and the first systematic legalist view we get from French jurist Duguay and the group of economists come revolutionaries called the syndicalist. The syndicalist thinking or syndicalist group, mainly in France and later on among some English people also, the word was very popular. That is, it is through economic reform that society is to be reformed. That is, by rationalizing economics, human relations are to be rationalized. So in this way it evolved like this. So economics, it will be proper, I think, to say that economics was one of the contributing factors to the growth of the idea of justice, but it was not the sole source or important source from that. But still, the link between economics and philosophical concept of justice is relevant. And the fourth source is ethics. And ethics seeks to establish the concept of value in life, in whatever we do, whatever we say, whatever way we behave. Ethics wants to establish certain value, that is standard of behavior acceptable to the moral world of the people from the standpoint of morality. So rule of right for human relations is ultimately derived from ethics and concerned with making a choice. The point with which I began from the very beginning, that what ought to be done and what ought to not to be done. So what is the basis? You have to make a choice that this is good and therefore this is ethical, this is not good because it is not ethical. So in this way, ethics plays a very important part in the origin of this concept of justice. Finally, we come in modern times. Again, I think Ernest Barker I must take, because he made a very systematic study of it. The justice achieves the right ordering of human relations, and therefore justice is a product of social thought. It is a social reality. Don't think that it is abstract. It is, according to Barker, it is a social reality, because without ethics, society will be without any discipline. And if in connection with this, we can also just briefly trace the evolution of the idea of justice, starting from Plato, who said that justice as a higher principle of life achieves harmony and maintains equilibrium. That is, between the claims of different people must be again reconciled with a view to maintain an equilibrium relations in society. After him, Aristotle, he made a more specific contribution by classifying distributed justice, that is what is distributed among the people. So who distributes? The executive and the legislature by making the law. So Aristotle was more specific. So he said his term was distributed justice. And another one, he said remedial justice. It is the job of the judiciary. If something goes unjust, wrong and unjust, then it is to the judiciary we go, and judiciary adjudicates. So that's one stage. Thirdly, we come to the Middle Ages, and the most important figure during this period is St. Thomas Aquinas. In St. Thomas Aquinas' thinking, we find a reappearance of Aristotelian insight. In between, we had the early church thinking originally, and then medieval church problems, and then the conflict between church and the empire, Holy Roman Empire. Yes. So all these things intervene to modify Aristotle's idea by St. Thomas Aquinas. Because again, St. Thomas Aquinas was a church father, but he was also a social and political philosopher by his own right, because of his sense of reality and sense of reconciliation. It is to be noted that the most important modern philosopher, Immanuel Kant, didn't make any elaborate discussion of justice. He was specifically concerned with inherent rights. What inheres in human being as a moral being. He said that person or individual, the concept of individual, is basically ethical. Otherwise, you can't understand the very spirit of Kant, or Kantian philosophy. After him, John Stuart Mill. We find that he adjusted concept of justice with his favorite theme, utilitarianism. So John Stuart Mill practically talked of social utility as the final arbiter of things and ideas in society. So anything which has utility is just, anything which has no social utility is unjust. He's more or less this, but he didn't went deeper into the discussion of ideal justice. Or in fact, we find that John Stuart Mill neglected the point of procedural justice, which even now in modern times we find that if the procedure is wrong, the idea becomes unjust. So this is, we don't find any discussion in it in Mill, and also there is no discussion in Mill on preventive justice, that is how wrong should be prevented. He didn't go into that in detail. And last of all, Marx and Engels, we find that they made no pledge or very important thing to justice, because to them the liberal discussion of justice is all bourgeois and has no relevance or acceptance to them. Therefore, he said that bourgeois justice, I quote, bourgeois justice is a mask for capitalist exploitation. That's it. So anyway, this is kind of evolution that I have just said. Now let us come to modern usage about justice. It denotes the greatest human needs. In the 20th century, because of the experience throughout the world, especially in Western world, everybody came to feel that justice is the prime principle of governance. And in this, I think, understanding of justice, the point that they made, that understanding of justice varies in terms of social organization, culture, religion, mythology, history, and ethics. So the broad canvas of the concept of justice and its relevance was seriously taken up in the discourses of philosophers in the 20th century. But at least we find that two major varieties they were being talking, if the lawyers on the one hand, jurists, and the political or social philosophers on the other. One is what we call retributive justice. Retributive justice means this is the problem with which criminology is concerned, and the military theory. In fighting military aspect, you will find there is always retribution. Yes. If you do some wrong to me, it is my moral right to return it. The meaning of distributive justice is basically a question of social and political theory. So now we can conclude with this, that what comes then to meaning of justice as such. In contemporary political philosophy, more concern for inequality than for equality. We think of inequality and how to remedy it. In that way, justice becomes a modern things discussion. And therefore, relation between justice and equality has always been a problematic. It is proportional, or what is due, it is just, or it is reward oriented. So discussion goes on, debates goes on. Distributive justice is very fashionable nowadays. It seeks to give benefits to common man, and we find that from liberals, the Democrats, the democratic liberals, there are so many varieties of political philosophy, but everybody, they puts emphasis on distributive justice, that is more or less trying to achieve a redistribution of the resources of the society in order to meet the needs of everybody. And very recently, another new term has emerged and taken a large space in political discussion, especially in countries like India, the concept of social justice. And the social justice is nothing but what we may call a reformative justice. That is, everything or something, social, economic, political systems are to be reformed in order to arrive at a just treatment to those who are deprived or disadvantaged. And in this, I think the best definition in 20th century we get from John Rawls. And he took the concept very seriously. When we, in the next class, we take up in detail John Rawls, we will find that because of a particular challenge that came to the issue whether value judgment or value in politics is relevant or not. Because behavioral sciences, they insisted that value is not necessary. And they insisted on observing behavior. But it is the moral philosophers who asserted, 20th century philosophers going back to Kant again, they said, how can it be? A just life is a decent life, and decent life needs the real adjustment with reference to some values. Otherwise, society will be lawless, and we will go down the line of immoral activities in society. That is chaotic societies. I think this is the point where we can stop and we take up John Rawls in detail in the next class.